Hello, Dr. Laprade. Today I decided to create a Monopoly board as a demonstration of my learning abilities about the structures and functions of the heart. I called it the Heart of Monopoly. In this video, I'll be briefly explaining everything that is on the board, but the cards are shown provide more detail. You can also pause when needed. Now starting off with the layers. The first layer is the pericardium. Pericardium is a layer that confines the heart to its position and allows for rapid movement. The fibrous pericardium is the next layer, and that layer is a protective layer that is made of an inelastic, tough, dense, irregular connective tissue. Now onto the serous pericardium, which has two layers, the visceral layer and the parietal layer. The visceral layer is more of a thinner layer, and the parietal layer is more of an outer layer. Now onto the epicardium, which is a thin elastic layer that adds protection against friction, and that's why it has the coronary vessels inside of it to protect it from friction. And now onto the Mariocardium. The myocardium is the main tissue of the heart, and it allows for contraction and the pumping action of the heart, so it is comprised of cardiac muscle tissue. Now lastly is the endocardium, which is a smooth inner lining of the four chambers of the heart, and it also covers the valves. Now moving on to the location of the heart. The heart lies on the diaphragm, and is 2/3 of the heart lies to the left midline. It can also be described through various surfaces and points. Now I will not be going that much in detail about surfaces, but there is an anterior surface, an inferior surface, a right and left surfaces, and those can be looked at on the sheet. And the points, referring to the picture on the screen, there is a superior left point, superior right point, inferior right point, and inferior left point. Moving on to the structures and pathway of blood. The right atrium is the right upper chamber of the heart. It receives deoxygenated blood from three veins, the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, and coronary sinus. It also has an auricle, which is a layer that increases capacity of an atrium to hold higher volume of blood. Now the blood travels from the right atrium to the right ventricle through the tricuspid valve, which consists of three folds called cusps, and it also referred to as the right atrioventricular valve. Now onto the right ventricle, which the right atrium sends the oxygenated blood to. Then this ventricle contracts in order to send blood through the pulmonary valve in the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk divides into left and right pulmonary arteries, which send the blood to the lungs. Now moving on to the oxygenated portion of the heart, the left atrium is the left upper chamber, which receives oxygenated blood from the lungs through the four pulmonary veins. It also has an auricle, which was mentioned before. Now onto the bicuspid valve. The bicuspid valve is the blood passes from the left atrium to the ventricle through that valve. It involves two cusps as implied from the name. Now onto the left ventricle, which is the lower left chamber that receives the oxygenated blood from the left atrium. This ventricle then sends the blood through the aortic valve to the aorta. Some blood flows into the coronary arteries, which supply to the heart wall. The rest of the blood goes to the arch of the aorta and descending aorta, which carry the blood throughout the whole body. Now onto the sulcus, which is a deep groove in the heart. There is a coronary sulcus, which is a groove between the superior atrium and inferior ventricle, and there's the anterior interventricular sulcus and posterior interventricular sulcus, which are both grooves between the ventricles. Now onto the cusps, which are valves that are made of thin flaps. They open to let blood flow through the heart and close to keep blood from flowing backwards. The trabecular carinae are a series of rigid muscles that are inside the ventricles. When a contraction occurs, they pull the chordae tendineae, which prevents inversion and leakage of the blood into the atrium. Lastly, chordae tendineae maintain the position and tension on the valves. The SA node is the natural pacemaker that generates electrical impulses. The atrioventricular node, the AV node, connects electrical systems of the atrium and ventricle. The AV bundle is the site where action potential can be conducted from atrium to ventricle. When the action potential enters the right and left bundle branches, signal to the apex to cause ventricle contraction. The Purkinje fibers are fibers that conduct nerve impulses to cells in the ventricles to contract and pump blood to either the lungs or the body. Coronary veins carry deoxygenated blood. The deoxygenated blood is carried from the myocardium and emptied in the right atrium. More detail is found on the cards about each vein and which part they drain. Lastly is the coronary arteries, which supply oxygenated blood to the myocardium. More information is found about each coronary artery in the cards shown.